The crunch of gravel beneath my sneakers still echoes in my memory. I was 14 years old. My mother lowered the car window just a crack, barely enough for her voice to slip through. My father never turned around. His hands stayed fixed on the steering wheel, as if the road ahead was the only thing that deserved his attention. A single duffel bag sat at my feet, and the chill from the train tracks seeped into my bones. "Let's see how she finds her way back," my mother said. Then the brake lights glowed red, the tail lights shrank into the distance, and the darkness swallowed everything. I never returned to that house. Not that evening, not the following year, not once in 2 decades. Welcome back to Quiet Justice Tales. I'm Ellis, 34 years old. This is the story of the night my parents drove away and left me behind. And the morning, 20 years later, when they reappeared, expecting to find a girl who had learned her lesson. What they found instead was something they never could have anticipated. If you've ever been blamed for surviving what someone else did to you, stay with me. Drop a comment and make sure to subscribe. People always want a grand reason. They expect a crime that matches the punishment. There was none. We were 3 hours from home, returning from a relative's wedding. I'd made a remark in the car. I'd rolled my eyes at my mother and mumbled that she always made everything about herself. That was it. That was the entire offense. My mother went silent in that particular way that meant a storm was gathering. Then she instructed my father to pull over at the next station. He obeyed without question. She twisted in her seat and declared that I needed to understand what life was like without all the advantages this family had provided. She called it tough love. She claimed a harsh lesson now would prevent me from becoming weak later. My father stared straight ahead the entire time. He never challenged her. Not in 24 years of marriage. And he wasn't about to start over a teenager's attitude problem. They ordered me out of the car. I believed it was a bluff. I got out because I always did what I was told. I stood on the gravel with my duffel bag, waiting for the doors to unlock again. The engine stayed running. My mother leaned toward the cracked window and delivered the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Let's see how she finds her way back." The car pulled away slowly, almost lazily, like they were running a mundane errand. I kept expecting them to circle back and start laughing. The brake lights grew smaller. Then they vanished entirely, and I was alone. Just me, the rails, and a station clock ticking toward a darkness I had no plan for. Nobody came back that night. I want you to sit with that because for years, I couldn't. Here is the part my family never told anyone. I did everything correctly. I didn't wander aimlessly. I didn't try to hitchhike. I walked inside the station and found the ticket counter. An older man behind the glass, whose name was Frank, took one look at me and his expression shifted. I must have looked exactly like what I was because he didn't question me. I told him the truth in a flat, hollow voice. My parents had driven away and left me. I gave him their names. I gave him the description of the car. He didn't lecture me or express doubt. He picked up the phone and called the authorities. He kept talking to me in a low, steady voice until they arrived. A sheriff's deputy showed up within the hour. She crouched down to my eye level and asked me what had happened. She wrote everything down in a small notebook, every detail, the wedding, the argument, the window, the words. She dialed the number I provided for my parents. It rang and rang. She left a message stating she had their daughter and requesting an immediate callback. Nobody returned the call that night. She made a note of that as well. That report still exists. There is a date on it, a time, a deputy's signature, and a line stating that the responding officer was unable to reach the parents. I didn't yet grasp how significant that piece of paper would become. I only understood that a stranger believed me when my own family had decided I was a problem to be discarded. The deputy asked if I had anyone else. I said no. And that was when a woman from across the parking lot walked into the station, drying her hands on her apron. Her name was Margaret Dolan, and she ran the cafe that sat across from the station like it had grown out of the ground. She'd seen the patrol car lights through her front window. She came over to see what a deputy and a child were doing in her quiet station at 9 o'clock at night. Margaret was perhaps 60 then, sturdy and solid, with reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair and a flower embroidered on one sleeve. She listened to the deputy explain the situation. She studied me for a long moment. Then she said I could sleep in the apartment above the cafe, just for the night, until things got sorted out. The deputy knew her. Half the county knew her. So that's where I went. Margaret didn't hover over me or offer false pity, which was the only reason I could tolerate being there. She set me up on a cot, gave me a glass of milk and a slice of pie, and pointed me toward the bathroom down the hall. The next morning, she didn't ask me to leave. She handed me an apron instead. She said if I was going to eat her food, I could learn to clear a table. And something inside me relaxed, because that I understood. Work, I understood. Owing nobody anything, I understood. One night stretched into a week. A week stretched into the rest of my adolescence. I learned later that Margaret had lost her husband and never had children, and that the empty apartment above her cafe had been waiting a long time for someone to fill it. I didn't know any of that yet. I only knew that a stranger had given me a job and a bed, while my own mother had given me a gravel lot and a sentence. It took about 3 weeks for the story to find its shape back home. A social worker named Diane Welch was assigned to my case, and she drove out to the cafe to speak with me. She was kind and sharp, and she carried a file folder that already had pages in it. She told me she'd spoken to my parents. I asked what they said. She hesitated, the way decent people do before they hand you something heavy. They told the county I'd run away. They told the neighbors, the church, anyone who asked, that I had a rebellious streak and had left ungrateful after everything they'd given me. She left ungrateful. That was the line my mother used. Diane Welch had it written in her notes because my mother said it to her face. I remember the room going very still inside me. I was 14, sitting in a vinyl booth, learning that my parents had not lost me. They had reinvented me. Diane asked if I wanted to go home. She had to ask. I said no. I said it without crying, which seemed to surprise her, and I have never once regretted it. The county arranged a kinship placement with Margaret. All of it documented, all of it legal. My parents signed the papers that permitted it to happen, which tells you everything. They didn't fight. They wanted the version where I was the one who left. So, I let them keep it on the outside. But Diane Welch gave me her business card and said, if you ever need any of this, it's yours. It's your record. I put the card in a drawer and tried to forget the entire town 3 hours away that had decided what kind of girl I was. The years from 14 to 18 went by in Greece and homework. I cleared tables. Then I ran the dish station. Then Margaret taught me the griddle. And by 16, I could handle a Saturday breakfast rush without missing a single ticket. I got myself to school every morning and back to the cafe every afternoon. I made the honor roll twice, mostly out of spite, partly because the library was warm. I never called home. They never called the cafe. The case file remained open with the county until I turned 18. And then a letter arrived saying it was closed. No further action. And that was the only acknowledgement the system ever gave that anything had happened to me at all. I learned to need nobody. That sounds like strength. For a long time, I believed it was. I wouldn't let Margaret buy me a winter coat without paying her back from my tips. I wouldn't accept a ride if I could walk. If something went wrong in the kitchen, I fixed it myself at midnight rather than ask for help in the morning. Margaret watched me do this for years and finally said one thing about it. She said, Ellis, leaning on somebody isn't the same as being left. I didn't believe her. I'd been left. I knew exactly how easy it was. So, I built a self that couldn't be parked in a gravel lot ever again. A self that owed nothing and asked for nothing and could survive a darkness with no plan. It worked. It also cost me in ways I wouldn't tally until much later. But at 18, I wasn't counting costs. I was counting covers and tips and the number of years left until that cafe could somehow, someday, be mine. Margaret didn't hand me the cafe. That would have offended us both. When I was 26, she offered to sell it to me on terms like a real buyer, and I accepted and made every payment without missing. By 30, I owned the whole thing, papers in my name, the loan in my name, the risk in my name. Then I went to work on what it could become. The cafe had been a good, tired place for 30 years. I made it a good, alive place. I kept Margaret's pie recipes exactly because some things you don't change. But I redid the floor, opened up the back wall, added a Sunday brunch that drew people from 2 towns over. We went from 40 covers on a busy day to 160. I hired a cook named Marcus who could have worked anywhere and stayed because I paid him fairly and listened to him. I hired Rita, a 52-year-old military veteran who ran the floor like a drill sergeant and loved every regular like family. We expanded into the empty unit next door, doubling our seating. The bell over the front door rang all day. I lived in the apartment upstairs, the same one where I'd slept on a cot at 14, except now it was mine with my name on the deed and Margaret's old reading chair by the window. Strangers who came in for the first time always said the same thing. They said it felt like home. They had no idea what that word had cost me or how far I'd had to walk from a gravel lot to earn the right to make a place that felt like the thing I never received. I built it anyway. That's the part my family would never have predicted. I didn't just survive the lesson. I outgrew it. I won't pretend the armor came free. By my early 30s, I had a thriving business, a nearly paid-off loan, and almost no one I let all the way in. I dated a little, and ended things the second a man started to feel like weight I'd have to carry or be carried by. I worked open to close because resting felt like trusting the day not to fall apart without me. Marcus once told me gently that I treated asking for help like a moral failure. He wasn't wrong. The girl who got left taught me a rule. And the rule was simple. If you never need anyone, no one can drive off and leave you in the dark. So that's the life I'm telling you about. A woman of 34 with a full cafe, a chosen family of staff and regulars, a wall I'd kept up for 20 years, and a peace I'd built one shift at a time. That peace was the thing I had to protect. Not the building, not the money, the quiet, the knowing that the people in my life were there because they chose to be, not because blood obligated them. Stay with me here. Because that wall, the one I'd spent 2 decades reinforcing, was about to get a knock on it from the one direction I never let myself watch. If you've ever rebuilt yourself out of what someone broke, you already know the sound I mean. Tell me in the comments where you found your own way back. Margaret died the winter I turned 33. It was quiet in her sleep, the way she'd have wanted, and the whole town came to the cafe after the service because there was nowhere else that made sense. I cooked for 200 people that day and didn't sit down once because sitting down would have meant feeling it. She left me almost nothing on paper since I'd already bought everything from her fair and square. But her lawyer handed me an envelope and a small thing wrapped in a dish towel. Inside the towel was a tin box, the kind that holds shortbread at Christmas. Dented at one corner, taped shut. There was a note rubber banded to the top in Margaret's slanted hand. It said, "For when you're ready, not before." I wasn't ready. I knew the way you know a sore tooth before you touch it, that whatever was in that box was about the gravel lot and the girl I'd been, and I had spent 20 years not touching that. So I put the tin on the high shelf in my apartment behind the good dishes and I left it taped. I grieved Margaret by working. I kept her pies on the menu and her chair by the window and her habit of comping the table when a young person came in looking lost. But the box stayed up there, dented and waiting for the better part of a year. Some part of me believed that as long as it stayed shut, the past stayed where I'd left it, 3 hours and 20 years away. I should have known better. The past doesn't honor the deals you make with it alone. It only waits until you've built something worth coming back for. It started with a stranger who wasn't quite a stranger. A woman came in for brunch one Sunday, 60s, church clothes, and she kept looking at me too long while Rita seated her. When I came by to refill her coffee, she said my name like a question. Ellis? My stomach dropped to floor. I said yes. She said she knew my mother, Brenda, from the old town. Said they'd sung in the choir together for years. She said it warmly, like she was handing me a gift. Then she said the thing that turned the morning cold. She said it was such a shame what happened. The way I ran off so young and broke my poor mother's heart, and that Brenda still talked about it. Still asked the congregation to pray that her wayward daughter would come home someday. The woman patted my hand. She thought she was being kind. I stood there holding a coffee pot in a cafe I'd built from nothing. 3 hours and 20 years from that gravel lot. And I understood that the lie was not dead. It had a whole life of its own back home. It had a choir and prayers and a grieving mother at the center of it. And that grieving mother was the woman who rolled the window down and told the dark to keep me. I poured the coffee. My hand didn't shake because I don't let it. I thanked her and moved on to the next table. But something old and cold woke up in my chest that morning. Something I'd boxed up as carefully as Margaret had taped that tin. The story was alive, and if it was alive, then sooner or later, the people telling it were going to want their ending. The first call came 9 days later. Rita took the message because I was on the line, and she handed me the slip with a look I couldn't read. A woman had called asking for me by my full name. She'd left a number and a single sentence. Tell her it's her sister Renee and it's important. I had not heard the name Renee out loud in 20 years. My sister Renee was 5 years older than me. The responsible one, the one our parents trusted to keep me in line on that drive home, which is a detail that matters more than I knew at 14. I waited 2 days before I called back. When I did, Renee's voice came on smooth and rehearsed. The voice of a woman who'd practiced this in her car. She said it was so good to hear me. She said the family had thought about me every single day. She said Mom wasn't well and that life was short and that family should be family no matter what happened in the past. Notice what she did not say. She did not say I'm sorry. She did not say we left you. She did not say the word station. She talked for 4 minutes about healing and forgiveness and never once named the thing that needed forgiving. I'd run a cafe for years. I knew a customer working up to a complaint they hadn't said yet. I knew the shape of a person circling toward an ask. So, I kept my voice even, and I asked her plainly what she actually wanted. There was a pause on the line, a real one, the kind that tells you the script just ran out. And in that pause, I heard the truth coming before she ever said it. Renee didn't give me the whole thing on that call. She gave me a piece and let me imagine the rest, which is its own kind of manipulation. She said Dad's health had taken a turn. She said his kidneys were failing, that he was on dialysis 3 days a week, that the doctors had him on a transplant list that was years long. Then she said the family was getting tested. Blood relatives, she said, were the best chance for a living donor match. She let that sit. She did not on that first call ask me to give my father a kidney. She was too careful for that. She just made sure I understood that there was a need only blood could fill and that I was blood and that the clock was loud. After we hung up, I sat in Margaret's chair by the window for a long time. I felt a lot of things, but the cleanest one was clarity. This was not a family that had spent 20 years missing me and finally found the courage to apologize. This was a family that had run out of options and remembered they had a spare daughter. The prayers, the choir, the wayward girl story. All of it had been the public version. The private version was a man on dialysis and a list of relatives to test. I was not a daughter coming home. I was a possible organ. And the worst part, the part that sat coldest, was that some buried 14-year-old corner of me still wanted to matter to them enough to say yes. That was the corner I did not trust. That was the corner that had once stood on gravel, waiting for the brake lights to turn around. I want to be honest about what I did next, because it would have been easy to just hang up the past forever and never answer another call. I didn't do that. Not because I owed them, but because I'm not a person who decides things blind. I sat with it for a week. I asked myself the hard question. If my father was truly dying, did 20 years of silence mean I should let him die without even looking at the facts? I didn't have a clean answer. What I had instead was a colder, steadier instinct. The one Margaret had spent years trying to teach me to trust. Before I let a single one of those people back into my life, before I let them stand in my cafe or near the quiet I'd built, I needed to know exactly what was true. Not their version, not my 14-year-old memory, which they'd spent 2 decades telling me I'd gotten wrong, the actual record. I'd spent my whole adult life believing that paper was safer than people, that a signed contract kept its word when no one else did. Now, that belief had somewhere to go. There was a report from that night. There was a deputy's signature and a social worker's file. There was a woman named Diane Welch who'd handed me a card and said, "It's your record." I'd kept that card in a drawer for 20 years like a fuse I never lit. If they were going to come at me with the wayward daughter story in front of God and the choir, I was not going to argue from memory and feeling. I was going to argue from the file. So, I went up to the apartment and I reached behind the good dishes and I took down the tin box that Margaret told me to open when I was ready. The tape on the tin had gone brittle. It split under my thumbnail with a small dry sound and I sat down on the floor of my own kitchen because my legs told me to. Inside, on top was a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a train ticket stub. My train ticket stub, the one I'd been holding the night they left me. A return to a home that drove off without me. I have no memory of giving it to Margaret. She must have taken it from my coat that first week when I was too numb to notice and kept it for 20 years. Under the stub was a business card, soft at the corners. Diane Welch, County Family Services, with a phone number and a case number written on the back in pencil. My case number. Margaret had kept that too. And under the card was a single sheet of lined paper folded twice with my name on the front in Margaret's slanted hand. I almost couldn't open it. When I did, it was short because Margaret was never a woman of many words. She wrote that she'd loved me like the daughter the good Lord never sent her. She wrote that she'd kept everything, every scrap, because she'd watched too many people get talked out of their own lives by folks who could lie with a straight face. And then she wrote the line, "I kept this the way I keep my mother's recipe cards, except this one I carry like a spine instead of a wound. Keep the proof, honey. People lie. Paper doesn't." I sat on that floor and I cried for the first time about any of it. Not for the family that left me, but for the one who stayed and saw me clearly enough to arm me for a day she knew was coming and didn't live to see. Then I dried my face and I picked up the card and I made a call I should have made years before. Diane Welch had retired, but the county office she'd worked for had not gone anywhere and neither had my file. It turns out you have a right to your own records. A former youth in the system can request the case file that was built about her life and a person can request a copy of a police report that named her as the subject. I didn't need a lawyer for the first steps, though I called one anyway because that's how I do things. I wanted no question about whether any of this was clean. The lawyer, a calm woman named Frances, told me I was well within my rights, walked me through exactly which forms to file and which office held which document, and told me to keep copies of everything I sent. So, that's what I did. I filled out the request for my CPS case file. I filled out the request for the police welfare check report from the night of with the date in the county and the responding agency. I included the case number Margaret had saved in pencil, which made the clerk's jobs easy and made me sound like a woman who knew exactly what she was asking for because by then I was. I paid the small copying fees. I wrote my cafe's address on the return line, the address of the place I'd built, 3 hours and 20 years from where the story started. And then I did the hardest thing a hyper-self-reliant person can do, which is wait on other people to send you something you can't control. I worked my shifts. I refilled coffee. I kept the bell over the door ringing. And every afternoon when the mail came, I checked for a thick manila envelope with a county seal. And for 2 weeks, it wasn't there. And then one Tuesday, it was. I waited until after close to open it. I sat in a back booth with the lights low and the chairs up, and I slit the envelope with a butter knife. The police welfare check report came first. Reading it was strange, like reading about a stranger I happened to have been. There was the date. There was the time, 9:40 at night. There was the station's name and Frank, the ticket agent, listed as the reporting party, and the deputy's name and badge number. There was a clean, official summary of what a 14-year-old had told her in a vinyl booth, and it matched my memory so exactly that I had to put it down for a second. And then there was the line. The deputy had written that she made multiple attempts to contact the minor's parents by phone, that she left a message identifying herself and stating that their daughter was in custody of the county pending their response, and that the parents did not return contact that night. A later entry dated days afterward noted that the parents once reached declined to return for the minor and stated the child had chosen to leave the home. Declined to return for the minor in a deputy's handwriting in a county file with a date and a signature. Not my memory, not my feeling. The record. Then I opened the CPS file and found Diane Welch's notes, including the sentence she'd written down because my mother said it to her face, the one about me running off ungrateful. The lie and the truth in the same envelope in the county's own hand. I sat there a long while. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter and heavier. I felt seen 20 years late by the only witnesses who'd written it all down. The pressure ramped up fast once they sensed I wasn't going to come running. Renee called twice more, the warmth thinning each time. Then the texts started. And they weren't all from her. My mother got herself a phone number I didn't recognize and sent me a message that read like a sermon all about honoring your father and mother and the shortness of life and how God forgives those who soften their hearts. Not one word about a station. Then a sharper one the next day, the mask slipping. She wrote that she'd raised me better than to abandon family in their hour of need. And the irony of that sentence nearly knocked me off my stool. Abandon family from her. Renee tried a different angle. Said she'd hate for things to get ugly. Said the family was prepared to come in person if I kept ignoring them. Said it like a courtesy and meant it like a threat. And here's the thing about a threat to a woman who's already survived the worst version of you. It doesn't land the way you hope. Let me say something to you directly. Because if you're listening to this, odds are someone in your life has used family as a crowbar to pry open a door you closed on purpose. You're allowed to keep it closed. You're allowed to ask what they want before you let them in. You're allowed to need proof. I texted Renee back something short and plain. I said if they wanted to talk, they could come to the cafe on a Sunday in daylight and we'd talk in front of God and everybody, just like she said. I meant it as a boundary. She read it as a victory. We were both about to find out which of us was right. I didn't pick the cafe on a Sunday by accident. I picked it because it was mine and because it was full. For 20 years, my family had told their version in rooms I wasn't in to people who'd never heard mine. The choir, the neighbors, the prayer chain. All of it happened on their ground with their audience. And I'd never been there to put a single fact on the table. If they wanted to come at me again, they were going to do it on my floor in my light, surrounded by people who knew me as the woman who'd built this place, not as a story they'd been told. That's the only kind of fair fight I was interested in.